Hi, I'm Sam Fessich from the EduMagic Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to another episode of the High Tech Podcast. No, it is not that kind of high tech, but we are two highly esteemed friends of one another.
How long have you been thinking of that one? You know, I felt like you built that up in your head as if like, here's my moment. We are not the High Tech Podcast. Like,
I've had people ask me that. Oh, you do a podcast? What's it called? High Tech Podcast. Oh, is it about marijuana? No.
that honestly probably would have been a more interesting topic, you know? Like
Savage. Yeah, just throw our podcast under the bus.
Yeah, it's fine. I do it occasionally.
We are here, folks, and we're pretty excited to open up episode 92. Full transparency. We have no idea who we are, where we are, when we are, what we're doing. We've been recording these episodes all over the place.
Yeah. So, like, here's a history lesson of the High Tech Podcast, okay? There were two men who felt... I didn't need to go back that far. But Will and I used to be very used to recording episodes out of order. And some podcasters are like, we do that all the time. And you know what? That's great. I'm happy for you. But for a little while, Will and I got used to just being on the same
actually
timeline.
Recorded episode 90 before 91, before 92.
We were not multiversal recording, jumping. We were just in order. And that has not happened recently. And I got to be honest, we're a little lost. But we know where we're at right now.
That's what show notes are for.
Yes, that's what show notes are for.
Today, whenever we have returning to join us, Dr. Justin Harbin. We're in the midst of the Ungrading series. This is episode 2. So before this, you heard from us about what ungrading is, just a little bit, right?
Yeah. And if you didn't, stop the episode right now. Go listen to that episode of what ungrading is. Even if you already feel like you know what it is, it's fun to listen to Will and I try to explain it when we realize we may not fully know what it is entirely just yet.
Are recording this very moment, having nearly completed the series, and you're only listening to the second episode. So yes, I will say from the future that we have learned quite a lot. It does get better.
It gets better. It
does get better.
Anyway,
all right, none of this. We're done with this multiversal nonsense. We'll get into this the shtick of things. We are going to have a conversation with Justin tonight about why should we do ungrading. Why should we do this? What's the purpose behind it? He's going to open up some of those points for us, lead us down a wonderful conversation of theory. There is going to be a connection break in this episode, so we'll see how I've edited it together.
I will admit the series has tested the High Tech Podcast ability to stream. We've been spoiled up to this point, so put your seatbelt on, get ready for a journey because things are about to get a little bouncy, but it's going to be great.
Buckle up, Buttercup. Let's go. Yep. So without further ado, I'm just going to hold it here. We'll turn over to the interview with Justin and get things going. We are here with Justin Harbin, Dr. Justin Harbin. Very excited to have you back again, Jay. How you doing, dude?
Oh, fantastic. Really wonderful to be along again. Always a pleasure.
Love it. We have been, having a fun night this evening trying to get you on the podcast. There was some Wi-Fi issues, there was some room and space issues, but it's all ironed out.
Yeah, we're here. We're ready.
It's okay, listeners. If Justin drops out.
Some might say those issues.
Yeah, if Justin drops out, we will.
I thought we almost blocked out.
Who's going first? Some might say, Justin, you were going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say these difficulties might be a metaphor for the structural problems that ungrading is meant to address. That there's something going on, and we have to strive against them. So I'm just saying.
That was much better than what I was going to say.
We haven't even started.
Let's move with that.
Great minds.
All right. Well, we're in the ungrading series. We kind of situated that for you a little bit beforehand, but like right before this, we've talked about what is ungrading, and now after this, we're going to move into how and some of the what's and who's, and we're trying to get all these questions under. But for you today, this conversation, we're just going to throw the ball out there. Why should we, or why do we do ungrading? I think there's always room in there. Feel free, to pitch in, like, why has the system been the way it has been in the first place? Oh, we could be here for 3 hours.
Oh, that's not how long this episode is?
Why? Could be.
I have a bedtime.
Let's start with this, though. What was your first interaction like? When did you first hear about ungrading?
Well, it's tough because ungrading itself is a broad term, right? It's a whole spectrum of practices, and for me, ungrading sits as one really important part, but just one part of a larger ecosystem of keeping student learning at the feedback in a kind of a holistic manner. And so, so for me, if learning is actually about change, long-term change in different ways, and kind of saying, hey, here's where my students are, and I want to stretch them in ways that are appropriate to their unique experiences and backgrounds to a place they could never have gotten if they just had a textbook or YouTube or ChatGPT. I want to take them where they can, because I'm a human, I'm better than ChatGPT as a teacher, for now at least. So for me, it's part of a larger ecosystem, and where I came into it was just over the years, as I grew into my own as a teacher, whether at the high school level or in higher ed, becoming super dissatisfied with the way things were. Early on, I remember high school and students, I would teach AP, US history, and things like that. They'd be so obsessed with their grades. And I'm like, man, I've never cared once about the letter or number next to your name. I want you to do well and do the best of your ability. Yeah. I just don't care about that number because I'm not sure about that. And it doesn't take very much digging into the history, and we can get to that maybe in a bit, to realize this is a pretty recent system and one that gives us, I think, a false sense of objectivity. I used to believe it gave this kind of sense of objectivity and impartiality, and I just don't know it actually does that.
Wait, you're saying humans can't get away from partiality and subjectivity?
When we just do letters and numbers, clearly. That's like...
right. If we just make
data,
it that simple.
Humans are totally objective. Yeah.
It's just numbers. You can't argue with numbers. Yeah.
Tell that to every student who's ever gotten a letter grade they didn't want and their parents told them to fight it,
It's exactly true. I think there's a moment, and this always happens when I'm on the podcast, is when I process out loud with you guys, and memories come back as I go. It's beauty that happens. I think one of the first things that really stuck out to me is like, this system is not helpful at a minimum, was when I was a high school teacher and I was kind of going through grades and stuff with my students, and I realized, hey, and at the time we had a 6-point grading scale. So, which, so you needed a 94 to get an A and up. As opposed to every school around us was on a 10-point grading scale because it was the early 2000s, and they had modernized.
No child left behind, and
they had modernized a bit, and so I sat there and I'm like, well, college as my students apply to colleges are not digging down to see which schools use 10-point versus 6-point versus whatever.
No,
so I was like, wow, this is really an unfair disadvantage. And then I kind of started to think, well, what's actually the difference? And I also immediately came up against resistance in that my colleagues, I remember distinctly coming loaded for bear to a faculty meeting. I had my studies, I had my research, and I come in there and I'm like, let's go. I'm gonna and not surprising, but the pushback I got, not from my administrator, but from my colleagues, was you're dumbing it down. You're dumbing it down. This is going to make the smart kids lazy. Because I was advocating at that point for a 10-point grading scale. And that was like scandal. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was scandal. And I just remember thinking, wow. And I had the research, guys. I had printed out like it was the 90s. I had like
a physical binder.
Oh, yeah.
Come on, be honest.
No, I wasn't that cool. It was
that's why they didn't believe you.
Like an amateur.
You didn't have a 3-ring binder.
Today, Today it would have been like a 60 slide
Yeah.
deck,
Oh,
60
yeah.
slide deck, just deep with citations and
Oh
good,
yeah.
references and stuff. But
We could have gone with like a
oh, man.
Leslie Knope scrapbook, maybe like a
Yeah.
full on binder would have been great.
Yes, Leslie
great
Knope.
reference.
Thank you, Parks and Rec. I love that
Yeah.
reference.
That's interesting
Oh
because
God.
I feel
Wow.
like that's what I end up like. At least my introductions to this, Justin, from you and a few other people. Like I feel like the response sometimes to ungrading in a big way. Now you weren't going for ungrading; you were just going for, hey guys, what if we don't do a 6 point, we do a 10 point?
Well, if we just did it
seems to be
differently.
kind of like the we'll dumb this down a little bit. We'll take away the standards. Like that seems to be kind of the similar reaction to ungrading in a certain way. Do you think that's fair based on your experience?
Yeah, or here's what I get, and I still get all the time in higher ed, is if you don't grade it, they won't do it.
Oh yeah.
I've got some interesting counterpoints to that we can discuss later, but I struggle with that too. But yeah, my unease came over the years as I interacted with students, and I was like, hold on, why am I grading participation? Like, how is that fair to my introverts? All these different things that were interconnected, and like what really would get to me was the anxiety my students carried with them about a grade. I'm like, guys, you shouldn't care about this. And yet at the same time, while I was telling them they shouldn't care about that, I was using a system that was continuing and perpetuating their anxiety. And so it caused me to ask, hold up, like, in what ways am I complicit in this? And it wasn't just the anxiety. It was like, you'd have a group project. And I would do these at K-12 or in higher ed. And man, and I get it. Look, we're all like, hey, when I die, I want my group project members to lower me into the grave so they can let me down one more time. But
that's good.
It's a meme. It's a meme from somewhere. I can't remember where it was.
So good.
But like I get it. But like to see my students like formed, like their dispositions be like for themselves and their own survival at the cost of others. I would look at that and be like, I don't like that. That's not a healthy value system, and it had been kind of shaped in them through the system. So yeah.
No, that's great, and that's I think one of those things that like early on I've been pretty. I know times where I was antagonistic against ungrading and it just maybe non-traditional forms of instruction. I mean, and you could just pull in any of the names of like the the hippie-ish or the new age-ish, K-12 education things, like kids running around with the shoes on. Like I've always like, I got my box and that was where I wanted to be. And yet if you think about what you started this point of like, what do I want them to learn? The idea that there's a number attached to that and what that scale of numbers is, it has nothing to do with what I want them to learn. It's something we did to try and measure them, to fit them in boxes, to, like we have one question that we prepped for tonight that we're going to probably ask you and Dr. Shea, but we'll come around to that because it's like in the end of all this, even if we decide to do it today, decide to do ungrading today, there's still that system. We all have to wrestle with that. We are still in the higher education system. There is still accreditation bodies, legal bodies that will make us submit something numerical or a letter grade at the end of the semester. So we have to wrestle with that, but I'll come back around to that one. All right. Why should we ungrade? I think we're hearing some of it, but like, what would be your lead premise, your elevator pitch
you
for
5
doing
minutes to convince
ungrading?
a new teacher in an elevator why to ungrade. And if you don't do it successfully, they will leave that elevator and implement a 6-point grading scale in their course immediately after they're done.
No.
Listener, Justin literally put his hands to his face and like just got so stressed with that.
Yeah, you know it. So I actually want to caveat before, I don't know that I would want to commit to new teacher yet.
Okay.
It may take some time before because for me, ungrading is so contextual, as with literally any educational method or system. Your context matters more than anything. What works for me at LBC would not necessarily work in another setting, and I think that is got to think through that with your team that you're teaching alongside, wherever your setting is. Okay, so here's the easiest argument I think to make. there's actual research that this is harmful. That
Yeah.
traditional grades and the ways we wield them like weapons can be. So can I give you? There's a study that was cited. And I can pull up the research and give you guys a link if you
That'd be
like
great.
afterwards.
Oh,
There's a
we'll
county
get it.
sheriff in Florida. Not surprising, of all places. A county sheriff was using
Florida
grades.
man.
Yeah, right. This is years ago. This is before current controversies. There was a county sheriff that was using grades to predict future criminals, and so like academic grades are being used. I'm not sure how student privacy came into that and whatever, but it happened. And we actually do have pretty significant data sets. I think the one I had most recently seen cited was from New York State, which is where child abuse often spikes in the home on days when report cards are sent out. And we know these things, and these are like more extreme examples. They're more extreme examples. I think a lot of the harm happens in very subtle ways at the emotional, psychological level. Grading makes mistakes unexpected. Like, oh, what happened? And like if you know anything about learning, all of us who are successful learners who have cultivated over time know that good learning happens most often, most powerfully through mistakes and risk taking. And I think part of it too. I love history. These sort of grading systems are actually really historically recent. I think the oldest like performance-based scales we can find are like 125 years old ish. But it's not really until the 1940s that we see any sort of standard system. So it's not like the sort of inevitable thing that was always going to happen. It's in the 1940s, World War II came along. It was the first time we started to see IQ tests, which are also bogus. That you can boil someone down to one number. And it's just we thought we could ascertain all that can be ascertained about the world through numbers. There was such a confidence in our ability to grasp that, and we've grown out of that. We've emerged out of that, certainly, but we carry on these systems. That's the short answer, I think. I mean, look at how have we done education well throughout the centuries? It's been through feedback. It's been through a lot of project-based learning. Think about the medieval apprentice having to create a masterpiece. And that would be examined by the experts who were masters in that trade, right? We know
these
those
systems
things
have been centuries old, and we're dealing with something that's barely a century and a half. Yeah, no, I love that, and that's one of those things where coming from my love for education comes from informal education, right? It comes from martial arts, where I started teaching as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, doing some basic support in the classroom, and then 16, 17, 18 started taking some of my own classes on. There's eventually some level of assessment at tests and stuff like that, but like day to day, class to class, between those tests, which can be 6 months and a year and 2 years apart, right? These tests are never close in martial arts. There's no grading. It's practice, do. And I've always loved that experience. I think it's tough. It's tough to imagine something like that compared against studying biology, right? Like a physical practice, a physical art. I've always thought that the idea of having like the authentic practice to physically do it in front of you makes sense with things that you can do that. But like, how do I study the structures of a cell? Like, what do we do to physically practice the structures of a cell? Now we can get into realia. We can make models. Today we could have that be a part of the 3D printing class, right? Who knows? But we could tell ChatGPT to make us structures of cells and then put it into code for the 3D printer and then put it into. I actually recently saw someone on Reddit show a video of a 3D printer handwriting his homework that ChatGPT wrote.
At that point,
so the
you
pencil
just
is in the
deserve to
3D
pass.
printer.
Like it doesn't even matter what the topic is about.
It.
If you went that far, props. you will succeed somewhere.
Yeah.
It just might not be in that topic that you were learning.
You would not succeed in a traditional grading system, but in ungrading you might. Yeah.
I do, again, in a research article, about cheating and plagiarism, stuff like that, at one point during my master's studies, I saw that this group in the West Coast, a group of students in the West Coast, got, expelled and banned and whatever, and is talking about the issue that they had in hand, that they hacked, not just got someone's password, like they figured out and hacked the firewall of the district and got through that into the server and found their grades, and didn't just like go. It's not like, we know, like they went into the Schoology LMS and logged in as the teacher and just changed the 9 to a 10. Like they hacked through the firewall, got into the server, found the data set, changed the numbers in the server, and then hit save and backed away. And they never even saw the front end user databases, right? And they got expelled. And I'm like, yes, I get it for ethics, but on the other side, like, get these kids a job. Like, someone get them into the CIA. Let's go. Like, they are going to figure these things out. And I think we've just got plenty of good, fun examples here of like how non-traditional learning, or learning outside of the grounds of the 10-point scale, works. People, it's like, it's not like school is the only place people learn. We know this.
And I think what really illuminated this for me, so when I first started teaching, I was a history teacher, multiple choice tests, essays, the standard go-to thing, right? And those worked fine enough. I didn't necessarily know any better. I felt like I had pretty good data. I understood that, say, in a multiple choice, I had to be very careful in how I wrote. I didn't realize all that I know now about, say, like survey instrument design and item validation and things like that would really could maybe help me write a better multiple choice question today. But not until I started getting into formative assessment in a big way did all of a sudden I got a richer data set on my student learning. And as soon as I did that, it was like, oh, wow, I'm getting such a thin picture with these other pieces. And that's what I recommend a first-year teacher, say, dive into immediately. And I tell my students this: you need to be using formative assessments all the time. And we do. I mean, obviously, you can define formative assessment as even something super informal, right? But that is the place to start. And once I then started decoupling my formative assessments from actual grades, that's
you
what
were
got
taking the steps. You were doing it small, little steps at a time.
But it was incremental. I'm not talking about massive change. It's just about those small incremental. I'm going to experiment with this, try with this, let it fail because I want to be a good learner, and model that. And when it does fail, I talk to my students about it. And we can unpack that. So
now, Justin, I'm curious. That might help answer the why question a little bit too, even more. Is like, what? So obviously, I know you kind of had like a progressive journey to doing some ungrading. If you could share maybe like some practical like ways you ended up kind of testing this in your own experience, of what you saw as kind of the byproduct of that's kind of pushed you over the edge to say this helps learning better than even some of our traditional systems do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So a small step that I took was, for many years, going back all the way to when I was a high school teacher, I would try to scaffold things well. So a project would have checkpoints, you name it, right? And I would give feedback on those checkpoints. And I knew some of my students were reading it. I knew feedback was important, but it's like you just pray and hope that they will read this. Right? And same thing when I moved to higher ed. I got even better at doing the scaffolding. I was doing it a lot more. I hope they're finding it. And one of my frustrations, with Canvas was, there's like multiple clicks they have to make to see your feedback if you're annotating the paper and whatever, right? So I'm like, I hope they're reading it. And the common knowledge would be, well, if you grade it, like they'll be doing it, they'll be checking it. And I just don't know that's the case. And so one of the things I started doing was to move to a complete incomplete system. I'd done it in my earlier days in K-12 and for smaller things, and it worked pretty well. And I shifted to all of my scaffolded points being like that. And it seemed like my students were actually, we talked through it. We had the conversations of like, I care most about your learning. And so this feedback is for you. That's what I want you to put the weight with, not the number. And so we moved that direction, and I've seen them engage at a far greater level. And so dropping the grades. And so one of the, I read this somewhere. Actually, I think it was in this book. Happens to be here on the table with me.
There you go. There you go.
you want a recommendation, this is a book edited by Susan Bloom. It's got a whole bunch of different chapters or essays written by other experts in ungrading. It's awesome. But one of the quotes in here, I'll just kind of paraphrase it, is if your students aren't reading feedback, try not giving grades and see what happens.
Ooh.
So you have to like pull the crutch away for them to like, because they're going to want to know what's going on. And we don't want to make them anxious. If you move too fast in your context,
Yeah.
you can, and especially among students who are higher performers. Hey, I teach in a teacher ed program, and I would say people who tend to want to be teachers tend to be higher performers. We don't necessarily, we get people who tend to be driven, compassionate, empathetic, whatever. And that's definitely true for us. And I'm always kind of brag on our students for that. I'm like, yeah, well, our students, they're kind of the cream of the crop.
You're the doting father figure,
maybe,
these are my students, these are my kids, they're doing great.
So, but that's why I have to actually spend a little more time. I think like, hey, this may really rub you the wrong way because you're probably someone who got really good grades in high school. Say goodbye to those good grades that gave you those dopamine hits. It's time to do different things, right?
Just like the apps on your phone. Well, and that's one thing that connects back to my experience with my now wife. Like at the time we were dating, she was in community college, and I think it was probably the first, I would say almost panic attacks I saw her get. We're sitting in her parents' living room. She get her grades back from the end of her semester, and it was her first and last A-. And I'll tell you, she was not happy. I mean, if you're talking about those students with anxiety, with whatever, like, I don't think she was anxious about it, but she was just so pissed. Like, she tried so hard. Yeah. She had a good relationship with the teacher. She did everything that us brown nosers know to do, right? And she got the A-. And I mean, the family's enjoyable moment of that story is then I threw her on my shoulder and threw her out of the house and said, calm down, and shut the door in her face. And that's when my mother-in-law knew that I would be her husband someday. But that reaction was visceral to her. I mean, I thought she was like playing it, but she was truly distraught about that one and only A- in her adult career. She did not get any more A- at her next degree study. So it's real, and she's the high performer. She was able to cope with it, but still was affected negatively. And the last point in the story is that eventually she talked to the teacher about it. She goes, "Oh, you should have just told me. I would have changed it to an A."
After
like a year later.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
So, but that raises a really valuable point, though. I think I didn't see the paper or the project or whatever it was, but the teacher might have given a lot of feedback. She probably didn't see any of it. She's at A-, and it's like, panic
Everything
alarms going off. So there's, and this gets into, so we've talked about ChatGPT, all of the hand-wringing about students plagiarizing and things like that, taking shortcuts, cramming for exams. These are indicators of a system that prizes points and winning above all else. And I'm an extremely competitive person, so like, sign me up.
No, you're
but
not.
It's not healthy. It's not a healthy thing. And so, this system takes the focus off the things that we know are most impactful for learning. We know narrative feedback is one of the most impactful triggers for metacognition, and yet we use these things that totally undermine all of our careful work. And there's a lot of hours that I put into my narrative feedback. You better believe I want them to read it and engage with it and use it and do something. So
it's interesting. I think, Justin, I've thought about this before, and we've had conversations about this before, and I've even said to you that honestly I think you're one of the people who's brought me around the edge of ungrading, because I was originally just more of a pessimistic LMS admin that was like, can we just set it up the way Canvas wants it, please? But like, to your point, like I remember this in grading students even last semester, like the amount of time that we put into feedback, it's only clicking, I think, really now and recently that the grades that we're putting in, they become a distractor from the feedback, which is really the thing that's going to help them learn anyway. Like, and it works on both cases, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
Student who gets a really good grade, who gets an A, we know that, like, there's so many cases they don't read that feedback because they're like, I've already succeeded. It's already basically perfect. I don't need to be better. I'm already good enough. And it's like, but that's not what learning's about. This is that A to us means something different in most instructors' cases. It means, okay, you met the requirements. Here's my feedback, though, we're going to be doing, especially in scaffolded assignments. But I think for many students, they view it as kind of like, I've arrived. Okay, next one, I'll keep arriving. And they don't read that feedback. Yeah, I got my A.
Why look back?
Yeah,
why think about it
read
again
all that stuff
if
my
you got
instructor
the A?
wrote? I already succeeded. I don't want to deal with that for the next 20 minutes or hour of whatever I'm reading, depending on if they wrote a paragraph or not. But I think, like, either way on both sides, that's discouraging the component. It's setting the standards on the wrong. I think this is the thing that's convinced me over the time. It's setting the standards on the wrong achievement. Like, we're creating a fictitious achievement to represent something, but we don't agree on what it represents.
Instead of the achievement being instead of the achievement being the learnedness. Like, if they had just achieved learning,
if there was development,
that's what we want.
That's what we should be putting a lot of the emphasis on success looking like. To your point, it's okay to make mistakes. If we're using that to learn, we're using that to take that feedback and get better the next time and reshape it. And grades, systems, numbers for that, that's not what that's about. It's more of like a concrete kind of let's put something in place to make us feel better about where we're at in the situational learning.
So you said something that for me just really summarizes another one of the big issues. It makes the wrong thing our priority, right? And what we're doing, much like many technologies can do, going to talk to a class tomorrow as a guest about AI and some of those things. One of the things I've been thinking about as I work with our professors is and this is really true with any technology, whether the technology is a worksheet made of paper that I'm using in a class, or a teaching methodology, or AI. For me, the right use of those is built on deeply human foundations, rather than exchanging what seems human or it seems effective by some standard. And what we often do is we sell ourselves for these really thin experiences. So think about spending all day on Zoom versus with people you care about. You don't feel great at the end of a day on Zoom, for crying out loud, or watching binging Netflix, right? I kind of feel like ill.
I don't know. Speak for yourself on that one. I mean, if I throw some Parks and Rec on,
it depends on the show. No, but we trade. We think because we've had these experiences, we don't realize what's been traded away. And so with that one, good enough, right? I got the A. Why should I even listen? Sure, you get feedback. Haha. I'm mostly going to look at it with rose-tinted glasses now. And that's the trouble, because you'll always have students who didn't need you to meet your learning goals. That's just reality. Wherever you teach, they were going to excel. They could have the worst teacher ever and no support, and they were going to do it because they had all sorts of advantages in other areas or prior experience or something, right? And so one of the changes I made for that was always one of my frustrations, is I would get these A students who would always meet the requirements and get the A because they met requirements. Okay, cool. But what have you learned? You've learned to follow directions, I guess.
Right.
If I'm looking, and for me, and this is a bit more of a personal thing, but my educational philosophy is that I want to see people form. I want to see them form holistically. I want to see dispositions and virtues develop over time, and that's a really tricky thing. I want to see them care about others and grow in those ways. And this is where I'm like, does this really? It almost commodifies everything. Everything can be purchased and bought and pillaged for my own purposes. Professor, tell me what I need to do to get the A so I can get in and get out.
Our students are just a bunch of Vikings.
Yeah, we teach them how to implicitly, right? We teach them how to. I'll watch my words, so I don't get too hasty here, but we basically teach them to traffic and spend this currency, right? Grades are a currency.
To put it that way, learning becomes an economy.
Yeah. or at least an economy that's around some things when it could be about other things. So
Right.
a small change that I made in my rubrics, and this was not without some pushback. Where I can, where I'm allowed to, I've removed points in Canvas. I can hide the points from them. But used to, well, you should have seen my rubrics back in the day. I had like, because they were so objective, right? I kind of thought rubrics were like the way you do that. And I would just spend so much time building these elaborate rubrics. And later on, I realized nobody's going to read this. And it's probably not giving me the objectivity that I think it is. And so I simplified down. I try to limit how many levels of how many criteria I'm working through. Try to keep that to 3 or so. But then even the levels I simplified, and instead of having 5 levels, and it reveals itself pretty quickly when you try to write a rubric and you're trying to come up with the words like exemplary, very good, good, almost there. Like you're like, what am I doing? And the amount of time it takes for us to like nuance that out should be like, hello, like you are being so subjective right now.
Red flag.
And for years I did that, and I'm like, oh, what's the difference between very good and superior? And we try to like, what are we doing? And so I upon reading great resources like this and talking with colleagues, I settled on doing 3 levels. I do does not yet meet requirements because we like that growth mindset. We like the power of the word yet. Cook it till it's done. Put that thing back in the oven if it's not done yet.
I like my steak rare though, so that's
steak's
pull it early.
Well, that's also that's weird.
Really.
So let's move back to the more normal system. So
does not yet meets requirements. Then meets requirements. If we had to put a number, just for sake of a conversation here, that would be like your high B, low A. That would be like your 90. I want my students, wherever their capacity is, wherever their the range of capacities for them, I want them to shoot for the stars. I want them to take risks like good scholars do. And so I have an exceeds expectations. And I have descriptions of what that looks like, obviously, but I want them to creatively, I want them to surprise me. I want to say, whoa, when I'm reading their paper and grading, and you never get a whoa. You very rarely get a whoa if it's just trying to meet expectations like I did for years. Right. Not until I started to push them in this area that I'm like, oh, wow, these people are brilliant. And of course, their students were brilliant before, right? But like this is, it gave them the
showing it to you.
Yeah, you got to give them permission to do so. And it's uncomfortable and it's scary because they have been conditioned out of any risk taking. And that's a problem. That is a deformity we have given to our students.
This really connects back though to a couple episodes ago, episode 90 with my brother. He was saying, he's teaching acupuncture and he was all about the question. He wants them to question. I said something back to him. I said, oh yeah, isn't it great that you get them all to the same question? He goes, no, I want them all to have their own questions. I want everyone to bring as many questions as they have. And what I'm connecting here is that point of what he's saying is that give them the space to take the risk to bring themselves to the learning and to ask whatever question might need to be asked. Like even question asking is a skill that we've kind of backburnered in the classroom. We want them to raise their hand and ask a question that lets us say the cool fact we know.
Right.
We don't want them to question even how we taught them that day, or question the methods that we're using in the final paper, or question the structure of the course, or question why we even need the information that's present in that day. Like these are the things that should be fair game in a classroom, because it is the lab to test,
right?
To put ourselves up on the line and say, are we making it? Is it working? Test our mettle. I love that about Charles's connection, that bringing that episode in, but like that, I think that's what you're driving to here as well, that you're creating space for them to take those risks. And it's applying to like a universal design for learning principle of forgiveness, that if they take the risk and it's not quite baked, it is not yet where it needs to be, they get another chance. Forgiveness to do it again, that the risk wasn't something they're going to get punished for.
Right.
Oh,
That's so good. I'm glad you mentioned UDL because that is such a great intersection. Again, I think ungrading is a part of an ecosystem
Yeah.
yeah.
of learning that is human and creative and playful, harkening back to a previous podcast episode, I
There it
believe,
is.
right? Um,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah. And
Oh,
even with that,
Yeah, I think it's
oh,
just
go ahead, Josh.
the thing I think triggering for me is just that at its core, ungrading in a certain way is trying to create an environment that encourages um, exploration with the mindset that like we want you to explore, and so actually we're going to more reward you for attempting even beyond a half baked
Mhm.
idea, not completely out of the crazy realm, but within the parameters we've set, kind of aiming for something, but just like shooting for it and hoping to get it. And if you don't, it's okay. We'll work through those pieces that you miss, or things where that was really good here, but where we came over here, maybe we want to be careful about this idea that you're talking about, and like helping them massage their understanding of something. And the grade system that we currently have
Mm.
definitely defeats that, like, because it's kind of the idea, if you don't hit it well, you're going to get that grade and it's going to stick in the grade book forever unless we come to an agreement about how you can redo this. And that becomes a
Ooh.
problem.
Or if we
Yeah, or if we
curve it,
curve it, like some made up system
oh,
at the end of curving it.
curves.
don't get me started.
Gross.
Curving is basically the equivalent of like throwing your papers down the stairs. Whatever ones go down to the fifth stair get an A, and if they're on the third stair, they get a B. Curving is, it is reckless and it is unprofessional.
Mm,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I love this.
yeah.
I mean, this is one of those ones. This is one of those episodes, folks, where like some folks we have tons of questions prepped and whatever. We knew Justin just like, hey, here's the question. Why should we do this? And here we are developing all
Although
these
I'm a little
thoughts.
disappointed we
Oh
didn't
my
get like a
gosh.
German philosopher or anything here. I was expecting some
Yeah,
deep
come
pool
on,
of
man.
some philosophy that you have.
Oh, I can actually, now that you say that, you said German. Will Czech Republic do? I mean,
that's fine.
I think that it was basically the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
region. I'm pretty sure. So no, it's actually. I'm glad you brought this up. This is good. So there was a education reformer. I'm trying to remember if I mentioned him in our podcast on Play. Sorry, I have a fly that's just like following me around.
No, you're
Yeah,
good.
it's
We
fine.
can't see
It's
it.
very.
But that was episode
So if you see
55,
me
by the way, for folks who need to go
swinging
back and
around.
listen.
Yeah, I want to say I mentioned. So his name is John Amos Comenius.
Yes, this is
and
the guy.
you mentioned him. Yeah, good. I love Comenius. So I love him for so many reasons. He's one of the very first to call for universal education, to argue that even those who are cognitively impaired deserve to be educated. And he goes even further. This is what ties into ungrading. One of his big cases, he had this just a love of nature and the world, and had this belief that so humans have more power than, say, squirrels. Right? If a squirrel makes a mistake, who cares? If a human makes a mistake, it can be a really big deal. And so,
Yeah.
and especially when it comes to caring for this world. And so his argument was the world needs humanity to be educated, and not just educated in terms of like book knowledge, but they need to be good people to use their power with wisdom and discernment. And that's part of what I'm getting at. Like, you start to strip away the humanity and treat students like they're brains on sticks. They can just spit things out. And this is a part of humanity always uses our technology as metaphors for ourselves, and they never work. I mean, we say things like, I need to process that. We're using the computer, which is such a crappy metaphor for the human mind, right? The human mind is so much better than a computer. And so we use these metaphors, and I use them all the time too. And we exchange these really thin ideas. We kind of trade and like, oh, this is it. We have now apprehended the world. We understand it now. And yet here we are, and we've lost a bit of what it means to. So a great example of this is when it comes to these grading systems. If I'm forming students unintentionally, let's say, let's give teachers the benefit of the doubt towards this kind of commodified view of education. Everything is to be pillaged. Even okay, kids, on your Nearpod, answer review questions from the textbook that you studied. And they're all racing through it as fast as they can. Right? It's just like we used to do with worksheets on paper. It's the same thing. Go find the bolded text, like as if you're.
Yeah.
We insult your intelligence so much. Go find the key terms from the textbook because that'll really help you. If you can find them that the publisher so clearly put in bigger font and underlined and whatever bolded. And look, I got an A. I passed it, right? It's like, what are we? And so we teach students that grades are essentially the main end, the chief end of man, as it were. I won't go down that rabbit trail, but
we follow you. We follow.
Yes. But rather, when we look into something like ungrading, it gives us permission. And again, ungrading alongside better teaching and learning environments and more equitable learning environments gives students permission to play and to be creative and to do work that is looking out for others. That maybe could it be that my own academic attainment is actually not just for me, but it's also for others. What a crazy idea. And what would our society look like if that's what our educational goal, one of our main educational priorities was, and we actually pursued it seriously? Because I don't think we can go to any kind of school, private or public, and you see these beautiful slogans on bulletin boards, and the superintendents are all happy, and the little students are smiling, walking through the hallways. Look at all the wonderful things we're doing. And yet we have these systems that I think are doing far more work than our fun workshop times in class that are teaching students about good things like empathy and what have you. No, these other systems are beating it right out of them as they get older, right? And by luck, some of them survive and become good people, or many of them do, right? But
That's savage.
That's a quote out of this episode now.
That's perfect.
Justin Harbin. Some survive and become good people. the promotion for education.
It's too late at night for me to be rational. Sorry, yeah.
Oh, you're good.
You're getting the unfiltered.
Well, I think
there's
something. I'm joking with you, Justin, but I think there's something good about that. What we're talking about, because we forget too often, especially in education, that like what you're talking about. Really, what we're doing is shaping people. Like we're not just imparting information; we are shaping people. Now we're shaping them towards certain things. We may be shaping them to love certain topics or certain ideas, or love history, or love we're shaping them towards certain things or understandings. But we've created a whole system that's kind of the backbone of what we're doing, that really is shaping them towards something that I think should be questionable whether or not we want them to go that direction, which is this pure achievement mentality instead of a growth mentality. It's just interesting. It's a core piece of what happens in education, and it's interesting how many of us will complain about it, but then at the same time will just like enter grades and reinforce it. We'll, with one hand say don't care about the grade, but with the other hand go, okay, well here's your B- because you didn't do these three things in the assignment.
And this, of course, I'm sure you guys already addressed this, or others will, I'm sure, in addition to me. With ongrading, we're not seeking to lower the academic rigor. We're actually increasing it. This is about Bjork's desirable difficulty, right? We're looking to stretch them to that place. For those top level students, if they're just meeting requirements, just getting that A, it doesn't. I'm not gonna be helping them. I'm not gonna be stretching them. So especially with our students who are underperforming, right? For whatever reason, grades can be particularly demotivating, and ungrading can give them permission to fail because that's what good learners do. We want them to see that, and so I think there is so much benefit for all of our students, but particularly for those who don't have great family supports at home. Maybe even mom and dad are in the picture, but they didn't have good educational experiences. And so they don't necessarily know how to help as much. So particularly for students who are disadvantaged in a variety of ways, like ungrading is a very equitable way to welcome them into learning and to empower them and to make them feel comfortable owning learning and growing in their own confidence as a learner, which gets me quite excited about a lot of this.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is awesome. Well, we've got a good bit of content here. Thank you, as always. We are going to continue these conversations. I hope you tune into the whole series, because I know you'll kind of love our scope here. but until whatever our next
Yeah.
harebrained idea is to have you on for the podcast.
I eagerly anticipate it. Yes.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, my friend. We'll talk to you soon. We'll wrap up here in just a few seconds.
Okay, so we're here to debrief from Justin's episode, but before we do, we realized that we needed more Justin in our lives. I think it's what
so
it
you're here
was.
for the debrief. What do you think?
We're here for the debrief. This is all going to be Justin telling us what he thinks of himself from the episode. Now, we did not do an app recommendation, folks. Listen, we're on episode 90. If this is the first time it's happened, go us, okay? We have to do an app recommendation. We can't go without that, especially with Justin on the podcast, because Justin knows plenty of apps, and I believe Justin, I know which one you're about to recommend. So let's just jump into it. What is your app recommendation for us?
I think you do. So ChatGPT may be the hot topic in artificial intelligence nowadays. I'll do you one better. In my travels on Edu Twitter, I came across one called ResearchRabbit.
Yes.
So ResearchRabbit is so cool. And it's not like the first time AI has been used to help you find scholarly research. It's just definitely the best I've seen. And so basically you start by finding one paper, you put the title in or something. If you find one that, hey, these research questions are great, the methodology is something I'm interested in, whatever it is, and you choose that as your starting point, it can then help you find other similar papers. And what's really cool is it creates this visual kind of web, and you can start to filter it and seeing what other papers are similar that were cited more or less frequently, or before or after the study you started with. It is really excellent. And of course, the more papers you build in, the more that kind of comes out. And what's really helpful too is it helps you. I plugged in a lit review that I'd already done before. And I just started with one of the papers that I liked. I'm just curious, what can this thing really, because it was one of those where I felt I reached that saturation point where I kind of was aware of all of the research in that area. And it really did a great job. It was yep, those are exactly the studies I would expect to see for this. And so I just used it the other day to kickstart some research that I'm doing. And what's really cool for those of you who love Zotero, a little double whammy for you, another app.
2 for 1.
It will link to Zotero. You can start there as your kind of initial brainstorming, and then export those to Zotero so you can read them carefully, mark them up as PDFs, and do all that fun stuff. And so ResearchRabbit, it is super cool.
Well, and it's even got the super cool website name. It's researchrabbit.ai.
Yeah.
Come on. I mean,
Yeah. It's already on there. Yeah.
This is the
I will
21st
say,
century.
Justin has showed me some of the stuff. This is why I knew it was probably going to be the thing he picked up. We were talking about it at AI sessions we were doing with faculty at our institution, and it's pretty cool. I think it's a cool and could be a very helpful tool, and leverages the hot topic today, which is really just
there's going to be a hashtag ChatGPT on this episode, and the views will be up tenfold because of that. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, happy to help. And I think it builds on what we were just saying in the episode that mentioned this about technology, but building on human foundations. What are things that are lower cost to me as a person when I use this technology? I was going to find those articles. It would have taken me a long time, and learning how to use the right search terms. I would have found them. It just saves, and it then allows me to give more time to the things that I need to do rather than the technology. So.
Love it twofold for your endorsement. I know you're using it. That's always great. The first thing that you see on their website, if you go to try and find pricing, is a big donate button next to their mission. Their mission is to be a free resource to support researchers. Literally, the mission page starts with dear researchers, you deserve more. I love it. It's trying to reduce the burdens on folks trying to do this work. So that's fantastic. No cost, not even freemium.
Get in on it, but until Microsoft buys it, and it's not free. But for now, it is free.
So true.
No, Microsoft will make it free. Then it just costs you a username and to be in their system and to be tracked by them. Not talking about Flipgrid or anything.
It's not what?
Nobody's
bitter. It's fine. Yeah, that's cool. ResearchRabbit, check it out, guys. It seems like a cool tool, and excited more. So again, Justin, thank you for joining us
Round 2.
for this returning. He drove all the way back to his room and popped back in to make sure you guys didn't miss your app recommendation for this episode. So as always, man, it is super awesome to have you on here. And now Will and I will actually debrief. Maybe, we don't know. Who knows? We might come back and another guest might be here. It's a crazy night.
Shoot me a text. Let me know if if you wake me up in the middle of the night, we can just keep going with this.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm open. I'm available.
You heard it from Justin.
I want to be on Chrissy's good side. I don't think I'm going to do that.
Anyway, thank you, Justin. We'll be back here real quick for a debrief. Oh gosh. Okay. So much to break down. I feel like we're gluttons for punishment, because
inviting Justin back time and time again, getting
Justin
so much from him every time.
So much to think about, so much information. I love the guy.
He kept the German, not antiquated. He kept the ancient German philosophers to a minimum this time.
Yeah, to the end until we kind of challenged him. I feel like we threw down his German philosopher gauntlet,
and he delivered.
He delivered with Comenius again. He's popping up. It's not actually German, Czech, but it'll do. For authors. Anyway, I think to a comment, we didn't mention this at the beginning, but it is fitting that Justin was here for the why. Because if we're being honest, it was a conversation a year ago with Justin during our gaming series that kind of triggered us wanting to talk about ungrading eventually. Will and I have been holding this one in the hopper for a little while till we could find the right time.
We kept looking at it like, all right, we ready to do this?
Is it time to pull the trigger? Not just yet. So it's very fitting. I do attribute, I think, some of my positivity towards ungrading to Justin, which is why I really appreciate him coming to talk about the why. Because at the end of the day, I think I keep coming back to this, and we talked about it with Justin, which is that the why doing ungrading is about the fact that we've created an arbitrary system for ranking people and ranking their learning that it doesn't actually equal learning. Like, just because somebody got an A doesn't mean they learned. It doesn't mean they learned. And that's a problem.
I know I'm that way. I just did stuff to get the grade. Like, I get it.
I got A's in classes. I'm pretty sure I didn't learn, or I don't remember, or who knows what happened. I was probably listening to the high tech podcast. The high part. No, I'm just joking. But like, it's become a motivation problem where like we're putting the emphasis on something that we don't want the emphasis on.
Right.
Like,
and we're forcing them to do something that's not giving us the result that we actually want. It's getting the result of them checking some boxes, but have they actually been transformed? Have they actually become a different person? I don't need to qualify it and say better person, but like, have they grown and become different? Have they been molded and shaped? I think that there's some conversations coming down the line in the Ungrading series where folks will hear more about what that looks like and how we can do that to transform our students in the process of this learning. But that's what Justin's setting up for us in this episode, right? If we want to do this, we want to do this because it transforms. Yeah. Ungrading is a practice that bucks against the system and elevates or emphasizes the learner, the student. And to me, it's like a, I don't know, it's just a check. It's like check yourself. Like, is your heart in the right place for education? Are you driving towards the correct goal? The faculty who I've met in the past, especially first and second year faculty, who are scrambling, scared, crazy, crying to grab at any book or pre-made PowerPoint they possibly can, because they're just like, give me something I can just say in front of the students. I really wish I could give them this advice. I mean, I've helped a lot of those folks. I really have helped a lot of those first year teachers who have never taught in higher education before, never taught before, kind of get something to be able to show on Monday's class. But I really wish today I could tell each of them, like, stop. Don't, if you're so scared of this, if you're not even sure what to do yet, stop. Set yourself an outline and just focus on getting the students to experience that and learn. And like, honestly, 1 year of teaching without a textbook and not going exactly towards all the pre-made quizzes and having a nice PowerPoint made for you, just do 1 year of that as your first year teacher. I bet you're going to make a lot more of an impact with the students as you work with them towards the end result, as opposed to faking it and trying to convince them that there's something you have to teach them. You know what I mean? Like that to me is like, here's the textbook. I've got something to say. I promise you, this is good. As opposed to being like, no, you know what? I've done accounting before, and this is what I've done. And it's not always fun, and it's hard. And we're going to have to learn these things, and we're going to have to do those things, and we're going to do them together. Like, that to me is a lot better of an attitude and posture towards learning and towards your learners than like, well, just somebody give me a system that I can put these students through, and it's going to get us learned something. That's
I just might be in the buck some of the system mood lately with this series, but it's I think there's something to it. I think there's something to this idea of how do we, at least with the grading system, release that arbitrary rating that we give students and focus more on feedback, focus more on transformation, focus more on pushing them to get outside of their comfort zone and look in those areas. And I think the ungrading, in a way, attempts to create kind of that playground for it. So thank you, Justin, again. If you're listening, I don't actually pretend to know if you actually listen to the episodes you're on or not. I have no idea. If you're like me, you probably don't, so you'll never hear this. But those listening know that we thanked Justin for joining this episode. So anyway, next week we are going to continue the ungrading series. That's right, this is a 5-parter, so we're barely in, folks. Okay,
just a toe in the water.
I couldn't come up with buckle. Buckle apparently is a hard word right now. So put the seatbelts again, because next week we are going to jump into the 3rd episode in our ungrading series, episode 93. We're not gonna have a guest on next week. Will and I are going to talk about how do you set this up in your LMS. So Will and I have interacted with ungrading before in the LMS level, and we have worked in multiple LMSs. We have seen the nitty gritty of how to do some of this stuff, and there is actually a way to build ungrading courses in LMSs. It's not beautiful all the time. It's a little jerry-rigged, but when you do it right, you can actually do a good supportive technology system for your ungrading courses. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next week and introduce you to an app that is near and dear to our hearts, TechSmith Snagit. We're going to talk about how that can be used for video feedback next week as well. So again, just a reminder, find us out on the socials at High Tech Podcast. It's here. It's located down here, and it's over next to Will. And if you're like, guys, I'm listening to this in my car, I have no idea what you're saying, that's because we're also on YouTube. So find us on Twitter and YouTube at High Tech Podcast. Come subscribe. You make me feel better.
Click the bell.
Click it. Just
subscribe.
Just do it.
If enough of you subscribe, we might decide to like do something with this podcast besides make it a hobby. Like we could be great, guys. We could make money doing this. No, we might not make money.
You mean like the two of us, not the rest? You said that like it was a group thing.
Everyone join us.
We will be
we can make money.
No, seriously though, if you like listening to us, let us know. Subscribe.
We appreciate
to us on
it.
YouTube. It would be great. You can find us again at High Tech Podcast. You can choose an email if you're interested in a topic you want us to talk about on the podcast. You want to be on the podcast. You have something you think you could share with us. We love having people join us. Hit us up at inbox@hightechpod.us, and our website has all the resources on all the apps we've talked about, our breakdowns of how to use them in apps that we've used really well. Will and I have even put breakdowns of us actually using them onto the website, so check that out, hightechpod.us. That's it. Check us out. We're on the interwebs, other than listening. Thank you again for joining us for another week as we continue to learn what it looks like to harness technology in the classroom, whether online or in person. See ya.
See ya.